In the quiet corners of 19th century America, a mind was taking shape, one that would challenge the very foundations of thought, psychology, and human understanding. His name? William James? Philosopher? Psychologist? Pioneer? But who was he really? And how did this man, born into a world still grappling with the shadows of the past, come to illuminate the future of the human mind? It began in 1842 in the heart of New York City. The world was still young in its understanding of the mind. Science and spirituality stood divided, locked in an age-old battle, and into this world stepped William James, son of a theologian, brother of a famed novelist, and a restless soul destined to bridge the gap between the tangible and the intangible. But William's path was never straightforward. As a boy, he was sickly, frail in body, but fierce in intellect. His father, Henry James Sr., was a man of deep spiritual quests, dragging his family across Europe in search of enlightenment. Imagine young William absorbing the philosophies of Germany, the art of Italy, the debates of France, his mind a sponge in a sea of ideas. Yet, beneath the surface, a storm raged within him. Depression, doubt, a crisis of meaning. He flirted with art, then science, then medicine, searching, always searching. It was a battle between the rigid structures of academia and the chaotic beauty of human experience. And it was this very struggle that would later define his greatest work. Then came Harvard, the hallowed halls where minds were forged. Here, William James would not just study the mind, he would dissect it, challenge it, and ultimately redefine it. But before he could revolutionize philosophy, he had to confront his own demons, and that is where the real story begins. Harvard, 1869. A young William James sits alone in his study, his head in his hands. The weight of existence presses down on him. He is supposed to be a doctor, a man of science, of certainty, but his mind is a tempest of unanswered questions. What is consciousness? Does the soul exist? And if life has no inherent meaning, how do we go on living? This was no ordinary academic struggle. James was paralyzed by what he called the nightmare of determinism, the terrifying idea that every thought, every choice might just be the inevitable result of cold, mechanical laws. If true, then free will was an illusion, and human life a cruel joke. Then, one night, it happened, a breaking point. Historians would later call it James's sick soul period, a descent into existential terror so profound it nearly destroyed him. But from this abyss, something extraordinary would emerge. He stumbled upon an idea, radical for its time, obvious to us now. What if truth isn't some distant, unchanging ideal? What if it's something we create through action, through living? This was the seed of pragmatism, the philosophy that would shake the foundations of Western thought. James didn't just study philosophy, he weaponized it against despair. My first act of free will, he declared, shall be to believe in free will. With these words, he didn't just save himself, he laid the groundwork for a revolution. Psychology wasn't just about dissecting brains anymore. It was about understanding how belief shapes reality. But the world wasn't ready. The academic elite scoffed. How could this frail, troubled man dare to merge science with spirituality? To suggest that faith, not cold logic, might be essential to human survival, they would soon learn not to underestimate him. Cambridge, 1875. The halls of Harvard echoed with the footsteps of the greatest minds in America, and among them walked a heretic. The establishment had rules. Psychology? That was for Germans in white coats, measuring nerve reactions. Philosophy? That meant dusty debates about Kant's categorical imperatives. But William James was about to drag both disciplines kicking and screaming into the messy, breathing, bleeding reality of human experience. His weapon? A single, explosive idea. The mind is not a spectator, it's a fighter. While European labs dissected dead brains, James asked the unaskable. Why do thoughts flow? How does belief heal? When does a mere idea become so real it changes your body? His lectures became spectacles. Students crammed windowsills to hear him declare that attention, habit, even religious ecstasy weren't just subjects. They were tools for survival. But the old guard struck back. This isn't science, they sneered. Where are your measurements? Your rigid laws? James just smiled. He'd seen the abyss. He knew truth wasn't found in lifeless formulas, but in the pulse of human struggle. And so he wrote the book that would detonate like a bomb in academia's marble halls. 1,200 pages, 12 years in the making. Not a dry textbook, but a manifesto, declaring that every thought, every fear, clear. Every leap of faith was part of the mind's relentless war to shape reality. The world would never see psychology the same way again. But James wasn't done, because now he was coming for religion itself. 1896. The scientific world held its breath. William James, the man who had dragged psychology into the light of empiricism, was now kneeling in the shadows, listening to the whispers of mystics. This wasn't just academic curiosity, this was heresy. While his colleagues worshipped at the altar of materialist science, James dared to ask, what if the mystics aren't mad? What if they're seeing something real? For years, James had secretly studied it all. Faith healers, psychic phenomena, the ecstatic visions of saints. Not to debunk, but to understand, because buried in these so-called delusions was a pattern. The human mind's terrifying, exhilarating power to remake reality itself through sheer belief. The backlash was vicious. Harvard's professor of superstition, they jeered. Former allies called him a traitor to reason, but James stood his ground because he'd glimpsed something revolutionary, that religion, at its core, wasn't about dogma, but about experience. In 1902, he dropped his masterpiece, The Varieties of Religious Experience. Not a dry theological treatise, but a roaring defense of faith as psychology's final frontier. Mystical states, he argued, were as real as any lab experiment because they changed people, they healed, they transformed, they made life worth living. The academic world reeled. James had done the unthinkable. He'd given faith a seat at science's table, but as the uproar reached its peak, a shadow fell over him, a pain in his chest, a shortness of breath. The years of relentless work, of battles fought alone, were taking their toll. Time was running out, and William James had one last fire to ignite. 1907, William James was dying. His heart, that restless, relentless engine of thought, was failing him. The doctors gave him months. Most men would rest, seek comfort, not James, because coiled in that failing body was one last, defiant idea, an idea that would outlive him. He called it pragmatism, not as the world understood it, but as he needed it to be. A philosophy not of cold truths, but of living ones. Truth, he wrote, is what works, what helps us navigate this bleeding, breathing world. It was an earthquake in ink. Imagine it, a dying man declaring that beliefs aren't facts, they're tools, that God isn't a being to prove, but an experience to live, that when we choose hope over despair, we don't just find meaning, we make it. This wasn't philosophy, this was alchemy. The world split in two. Traditionalists howled, but the displaced, the seekers, the wounded healers of a changing century, they understood. Because James wasn't just writing philosophy, he was writing a survival manual for the modern soul. On August 26, 1910, the heart finally stilled. But the man? Oh, the man refused to die. His ideas marched on, into psychology labs, into civil rights speeches, into the DNA of American thought. Because William James had discovered the ultimate pragmatist truth. Great ideas don't end when their thinkers do. So tell me, what will you choose to believe into existence? William James taught us that ideas are alive, shaped by those who carry them. So tell me, which of his truths will you choose to live by?